Prince Letitia ascended to the throne in March 1916. He was fitted with the Admiral uniform and took his place as the Litunga. He would be known now as King Letitia Yeta III. And this is his first wife, now a queen. He worked hard to see the expansion of schools through the diversification of topics. He appointed his 2 brothers as private secretaries. 3 other brothers and 2 of his very own sons he appointed into the Kuta. Sons of Indunas also began to replace their fathers. The common denominator amongst these men was education. Educated either in Barotseland, Basotoland, or South Africa, these men were educated. George Lyons, who was the resident magistrate of Barotseland in 1916, came to loathe these men and described them as half-educated schoolboys. But that was not true. They had studied legal terms and scoured through all of the concessions. They knew how to use a typewriter and wrote in the Queen's English. They had quick political minds. Their aim was to restore the power and glory back to Barotseland, back to the Lozis, and out of the grip of the company. Upon becoming king, King Yeta petitioned for direct protection from the British Crown and the cancellation of the British South Africa Company acting as an agent on behalf of the British government. He also requested for the return of the Caprivi Strip, which had been given out without the consent of Lewanika. The British South Africa Company had a new resident administrator to replace Mr. Corendon, and for some reason he outlawed the title King and decreed that from now on the Litunga would be known as the paramount chief. This was actually done while Lewanika was alive, but it was Letitia who petitioned that this be outlawed because they were kings. In 1923, the British government chose not to renew the contract with the British South Africa Company and gave Northern Rhodesia direct protectorate status under the Crown as of April 1st, 1924. Northern Rhodesia was governed by a governor under the British Colonial Office. This took effect, as I said, as of April 1st, 1924. Now, 27 days later, in Chinsali, Kenneth Kaunda was born on April 28, 1924. King Yeta was undoubtedly pleased and relieved to finally be under the direct governance of the Crown, and he took the opportunity in a speech to remind the British that Barotseland was never a conquered territory, but it had entered into treaties for protection, and that its status as a protectorate should be upheld. The British agreed and continued to liaise with Barotseland as an individual protectorate within a protectorate. Now, larger deposits of copper had been discovered, and this caused men to travel for work from within Northern Rhodesia, Barotseland, Southern Rhodesia, South Africa. Men came from all over. And it was in 1928 that the area, Lumberland, was renamed the Copper Belt. Black workers had low wages, poor living and working conditions. The Mwenzo Welfare Association was created by Donald Siwale to be the voice for these workers. I refer you to a video on my YouTube channel called Zambian History That Did Not Make It Into Our History Books. It's a fascinating video done by Akashambatwa Mbikusita Lewanika. He talks about the people who began to fight for the rights of the black people in northern Rhodesia way before UNIP was even created. In 1936, the Barotse Native Authority was established with a treasury. A majority of the restrictions the British South Africa Company had placed on Barotseland were relaxed, and Barotseland was given autonomy in the field of land and natural resources, management, law enforcement, and jurisdiction. And due to its population being highly educated, their native authority had more administrative ability than any other native authority in northern Rhodesia. And this was the case until the end of British colonial rule. In 1937, King Yeta would return to England for the coronation of King George VI. In 1945, due to a stroke that left him impaired, he relinquished the throne in June, and his younger brother ascended. Nonetheless, on January 1st, 1946, King Yeta was bestowed the title of Commander of the British Empire, CBE. Imwiku, now 60 years old, had been serving as a chief in Sesheke. He was the son Lewanika sent to school in Goudhurst, England. Using colonial development and welfare funds, the central government established a development center in 1947 in the south of Sefula at Namushakende. This development center specialized in forestry, agriculture, and veterinary services. At the time, some of the Kutas of Nalolo and Lealui feared that the scheme would give away more Lozi land to the white man, and they refused to lease the land. This meant that King Imwiko signed the formal document on his own initiative. Today, the development center is known as Namushakende Farmer Training Institute in Mongu. In 1947, King George VI visited northern Rhodesia, and arrangements were made for him to meet with the Litunga Imwiko in Livingston. King George awarded the Litunga with a gold medal. Sadly, the following year in 1948, King Imwiko suddenly took ill and died in June. He would only serve as the Litunga for 3 years. In 1948, Wanawina, a son of King Lewanika, would ascend to the throne, and he would be known as King Wanawina III. In the same year, his brother Godwin Mbekusita Lewanika would form the first ever political party in Northern Rhodesia, known as the Northern Rhodesian Congress. I refer you to my YouTube channel to a video entitled History of Zambia, Freedom of Speech, to give you more information on the evolution of the first political party leading to other political parties, including UNIP. In 1948, the Barotse Native government presented a petition to the Northern Rhodesian government. It was pointed out that the Barotse Native Authority and the Barotse Native Court ordinances had reduced the Litunga's powers sharply, and that his prestige was being affected by these. The Litunga was unhappy about the control the Northern Rhodesian government exercised over the appointments and dismissals of members of his courts. The Barotse Native government therefore petitioned that all powers lost should be restored and rights and privileges should be reaffirmed. In July 1951, the Litunga, Ngambela, and two Indunas were invited to the government house in Lusaka to examine the grievances of the petition. The government pointed out that it was impossible for the government to relinquish all supervisory control, and wherever an agreement could not be reached, the matter was referred to the governor. The people of Barotseland did not have to obtain the Ichitupa, which was an ID card that all black Northern Rhodesians had to have. This is because black people did not have the freedom of movement. Neither could they just decide to travel to any town or any city. In 1953, the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland was imposed against the wishes of the majority of African people, especially in Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland. The Lozi declared that they would not object to the Federation provided that the rights under the concessions would be preserved and that Barotseland would be declared by order in council as Barotseland protectorate. The British government obliged to this. That same year, 1953, Mwanawina III was invited to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. In 1956, the African National Congress released a circular where they were encouraging Africans to begin to speak about freedom and self-determination. In 1958, the governor of Northern Rhodesia, Sir Arthur E.T. Benson, met African National Congress leaders to consider constitutional changes whereby 8 seats were given to Africans and Europeans were given 14 in the Legislative Council. This was unacceptable, and members of the Zambia African National Congress launched a vicious attack against voter registration for these elections. Their party was eventually banned in 1959, and all of its leaders were arrested and sent into detentions in remote rural districts. However, the Barotse Native government did participate in these elections, and they won 2 seats. That same year, the Litunga Mwanawina Lewanika III was included in the Queen's New Year's honors list. He was knighted and became Sir Mwanawina Lewanika III, Knights of the British Empire, KBE. In 1960, soon after Kenneth Kaunda was released from jail and elected president of UNIP, he traveled to Mongu with a delegation of new UNIP leaders to pay a courtesy call on the Litunga. The Litunga did not only refuse to receive the UNIP delegation, but he invoked Order 8 of the Barotse Native Orders and Rules to ban the delegation from holding any public meetings. This particular order was used by the Barotse Native government to deport, arrest, and imprison nationalists. It said that no person shall hold a public meeting of any kind, whether for religious or other purposes, unless such person has first obtained written permission from the native authority, the district kuta, to do so. In 1960, Kamuzubanda, Kaunda, and Nkomo traveled to London to demand the end of the Federation and press for self-determination for each of their countries. As stated earlier, Barotseland were in favor of the Federation of Nyasaland and Rhodesia, but it was becoming clear that it might not hold, and so in April 1961, Sir Mwanawina III flew to London with his Ngambela to demand secession from the British Colonial Secretary, Mr. Ian MacLeod. The Ngambela told MacLeod that the paramount chief, the Barotse native government, and the people were unanimous in demanding a separate state. Even though the request for secession was declined, Ian MacLeod made it a point to assure the Litunga that all of the terms and conditions within the treaties would be upheld. A debate that took place in the Houses of Parliament on Friday, 5th May 1961, gives us an indication to know that the expenses the British Protectorate of Barotseland were having on the British government were beginning to be a concern. Mr. Stonehouse asked the Secretary for the Colonies what was the cost of the official visit of the paramount chief Mwanawina of Barotseland and his retinue to this country, and by whom the expenses were paid. Mr. Ian MacLeod responded to say that the estimated cost of the visit of the Litunga and his delegation is £5,560, of which £3,341 will be met by the Northern Rhodesian government and £2,119 by the Barotse native government. Sir Roy Welensky was the last Prime Minister of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and the more hostile towards Mwanawina UNIT became, the more valuable an ally Mwanawina appeared to Roy Welensky. In early 1962, Welensky suggested to Mwanawina a plan for a new federation incorporating Southern Rhodesia, the Copperbelt, Katanga, and Barotseland. Welensky is said to have offered to arrange a meeting between the Litunga and the Shombe, but Mwanawina rejected the scheme, fearing it would alienate his white friends in Lusaka and London. Who was Tshombe? Moise Kapin Tshombe was a Congolese businessman and a politician. He served as president of the secessionist state of Katanga from 1960 to 1963. Welensky was undeterred, however, and in February 1962, he put roughly the same proposition to Duncan Sandys. He would agree to secession of Nyasaland and northeastern Rhodesia in return for a new federation in which southern Rhodesia would provide the talent, the Copperbelt the wealth, and Barotseland the labor, as well as a cooperative African ruler. Accompanied by Godwin Mbikusita, who had become one of Welensky's two parliamentary secretaries, he flew to Barotseland, conferred with the Litunga, and left with a signed document formally requesting Barotseland secession from Northern Rhodesia while remaining within the Federation. Secession within or without a federation remained their Louis demands, as Godwin and Mbikusita, busily intrigued behind the scenes, encouraged the Litunga not to capitulate. Immediately thereafter, Welensky and Mbikusita were informed by R.A. Butler, the Deputy Prime Minister who took over the portfolio of Central Africa, that while Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland would be permitted to secede from the Federation, Barotseland could not secede from Northern Rhodesia. The Lozi ruling class therefore considered that it had no alternative. They would rather side with the European settlers than with the nationalists. In the October 1962 territorial elections, the Lozi traditionalists created a separate political party, the Sikaba Party. The Sikaba Party reaffirmed the policy of separate existence and opposed the United National Independence Party on the grounds that UNIP threatened to destroy the Lozi kingship, dispose the Indunas, integrate the Barotseland into Zambia. The Sikaba Party would free Barotseland from UNIP rule. UNIP, on the other hand, reassured the Lozi traditionalists that UNIP in government would not interfere with the Litunga's personal position and with Barotseland's protectorate status, but Barotseland would remain within the new Republic of Zambia. Great economic benefits for Barotseland within the Republic were listed, such as more schools, agricultural development centers, more and better roads, including a railway line from Mongu to Lusaka. In October 1962, the results were as follows. UNIP won 14 seats. The ANC won 7 seats, while the white settler-dominated UFP won 16. In Barotseland, UNIP candidates defeated both the Sikaba Party and the ANC candidates. The win was not easy, as Sikotawina explains in this article. It took him 2 months to negotiate for the ban to be lifted, the ban that was imposed on UNIP 2 years prior. The elections were taking place in October, and by May, Kaunda was still not allowed to step foot in Barotseland. Sikotawina appealed to Sir Evelyn Hahn and the resident commissioner of Barotseland. They, in turn, advised the Litunga to lift the ban. However, elsewhere, Nalumina Mundia, a Lozi UNIP leader, was freely campaigning in Ndola for the end of the Federation. In conclusion, the article mentions Kaunda going to Limulunga to pay respects to Litunga Mwanawina at his palace. Kaunda later on held a public rally. In 1963, the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland was dissolved, and a burial ceremony was held for the Federation in Chililabombwe. And on the 5th of November, the Chief Secretary was authorized by the Secretary of State to make a ministerial statement in the Legislative Council concerning the new constitution for Northern Rhodesia to proceed to internal self-government. A new constitution would have to be drawn out for the self-rule that was going to take place in Northern Rhodesia. The British government had decided that as part of their decolonization, they would have to relinquish themselves from having Barotseland as a protectorate, and that Barotseland would have to integrate with Northern Rhodesia. Meanwhile, the new ANC and UNIP government, as part of their political reforms, held elections in Barotseland for the Katengo Kuta Barotseland National Council. UNIP won all 25 seats. In September 1963, the Litunga, 5 elected officials, and some Indunas met with Simon Kapwepwe and Arthur Weena in Livingston. The topic was to discuss the way forward for Barotseland and Northern Rhodesia. It was believed that the UNIP party had a policy for total integration for Barotseland without any autonomy. At the meeting, the elected UNIP members joined with the Litunga and refused to compromise on the question of Barotseland's special status. They stood their ground to say that Barotseland would be part and parcel of Zambia, but with Barotseland's special status intact and enshrined in the Zambian constitution. In December 1963, the Barotse native government and the British government's technical advisor seconded to the Litunga, Mr. Hudson, and the Barotse government lawyers, Mr. Wilson, based in southern Rhodesia, Mr. Cook, based in South Africa, and Mr. Bell, who was a Labour Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, drew a memorandum on the future of Barotseland within Zambia, which was presented to the entire National Council for thorough debate. The memorandum was adopted with a minor change which replaced the phrase "to proceed to independence on an equal footing as sister states" with "to proceed to independence as an integral part of Zambia." This change was snuck in by Arthur Wina upon being consulted by the elected members of the Barotse National Council. The Litunga Sir Mwana Wina was displeased with the inclusion of the term integral, whose meaning he explained to the members of the council by likening it to the status of a fetus in the mother's womb. That is to say, how does a mother, Barotse, become an integral part of a fetus, Zambian, which is not yet born? He could have insisted on the revision of the phrase, but he allowed it to pass. In January 1964, another round of elections were held under the terms of the new constitution. 3 political parties participated: UNIP under Kaunda, the ANC under Harry Nkumbula, and the National Progress Party, NPP, under John Roberts. UNIP won 55 seats, ANC 10 seats, NPP 10 seats. With this win, Kenneth Kaunda became the Prime Minister of Northern Rhodesia. A meeting was held in Lusaka and chaired by Evelyn Hone between the government of Barotseland and the government of Northern Rhodesia. The deliberation resulted in all the requests made by the Barotse government being adopted. However, the only thing left out was including it in the constitution. The Northern Rhodesian government was opposed to incorporating it into the Zambian constitution and said that it would be better if it remained as a separate document. The talks ended with a stalemate. The Litunga was under pressure because within Barotseland, the traditionalists wanted to maintain the special relationship that Barotseland has with Britain, while some wanted to remain an integral part of the future independent Republic of Zambia. On April 16, 1964, the Litunga Sir Mwanawina Lewanika and the Prime Minister of Northern Rhodesia, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, concluded a provisional agreement under the chairmanship of the governor that Northern Rhodesia and Barotseland would go forward to independence as one country. In May 1964, the Litunga was invited by Duncan Sandys, who had taken over from Mr. Butler at the Foreign Office. He was invited to send a delegation to London to participate in the independence constitutional talks. The British government would not buy into the reasoning that the Lozi members of the UNIP delegation would represent Barotseland interests. This is because the UNIP delegation had already been in London. In addition, there were also delegations of the African National Congress led by Harry Nkumbula and the National Progress Party led by John Roberts. Here we see that all four leaders in the protectorates participated in the independence constitutional talks for Zambia. The talks were held at Lancaster House, so I hopped on a train to show you what the building looks like. While in London, Wanawina pled one more time for secession, but Butler told him bluntly that Britain could not afford to support Barotseland financially if it were divorced from Northern Rhodesia. On May 18, 1964, the Barotseland Agreement was signed at the Commonwealth Relations Office, and the Litunga was recognized as the principal local authority for the government and administration of Barotseland. Let's have a look at what exactly was in this agreement. So paragraph 1 basically just talks about how the three individuals named Duncan Sandys, Kenneth Kaunda, and Wanawina Lewanika sign this treaty, paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 just says Northern Rhodesia will become independent and known as the Republic of Zambia. Paragraph 3, the government of Northern Rhodesia and the Barotse agree to proceed as one nation. Paragraph 4, any treaty Britain ever had with the Barotse is terminated, and that both the Litunga and Kenneth Kaunda agree to become one, and that they will agree to make arrangements that would take the place of these terminated agreements between Her Majesty and Barotse. Paragraph 5 makes mention of the provisional agreement that they had signed in Lusaka in April, and that based on the following, that agreement will now become permanent. Number 1, the agreement shall be known as Barotseland Agreement, and it will come into force when Northern Rhodesia becomes independent, and that, as we know, is October 24th, 1964. Number 2, under the Republic and Constitution of Zambia, its provisions shall have full force and effect in Barotseland. Number 3, on the administration of justice, the people of Barotseland are accorded access to the judicial system, embracing the whole country like any other citizens in the country. Number 4, and this is where the meat gets tough. This agreement says that the Zambian government will recognize the Litunga under the Barotse customary law. Why? Because he is the principal local authority for Barotseland. And all he has to do is confer with his council in regard to whatever he wants to do in his area, and not the Zambian government. You need to recognize the Litungaship, recognize the native authorities, the native courts, the native treasury. These guys were allowed to collect taxation. We can look at this list here. They had control of hunting. They had control of land, of the forest. They had control of the supply of beer, festivals. I mean, the Litunga, he was a walking local authority. Like if you got to go to your local authority building, you got to go to the building. He was the local authority. He was your municipal office. Amazing. Number 5. In regards to land, it reiterates the fact that anyone wanting to develop in a chiefdom's area, that they would need to get the permission from the chief. Numbers 6, 7, and 8 pretty much talk about the overall responsibility that the government of Zambia has in these areas. Section 9 gives clear instructions to the government of Zambia and to the Litunga and his council in regard to further interpretation that may be needed after this agreement becomes legal, and they are directed to take any issues to the Zambian High Court. We then see who the signatories were to this agreement. And in the annex, the agreement reiterates the centrality of the understanding between the government of Zambia and Barotseland on the matter of land, without losing sight of the overall responsibility of the government of Zambia over the land issue. At the same time, Barotseland remains established in the administration of Barotse customary land law within Barotseland. Now let's head over to Westminster. The Houses of Parliament. Because 3 months after the Barotse Agreement was signed, a debate was held in the House of Commons where Mr. Ronald Bell had to respond to the accusations that the Litunga of Barotseland had been brought in at 10 o'clock at night to sign an agreement by which he lost the control of his country and which in effect abolished Barotseland and completely changed the situation of that country. He says that that accusation is far from being true. He argues that the agreement signed at 10 p.m. at night was the final draft of the agreement signed in April in broad daylight in Lusaka, and he found no significance in the hour that the agreement was signed because Parliament, as he says, reaches most of its important decisions by 10 p.m. anyway. He refutes the claim that the Litunga has lost all his powers and challenges members of the House to actually read the agreement. In August 1964, Prime Minister Kenneth Kaunda would make a trip to Lealui, where he's seen here with the Litunga Mwanawina. The reason for his trip was to speak to the people of Barotseland, who still had concerns about the various appointments that the Zambian government were going to make in Barotseland and how those appointments were going to undermine the native governments and the treasury and things that they already had in place. Kaunda unreservedly reassures them that everything in the agreement is going to be adhered to. Now, this is critical because the British government were not going to allow Northern Rhodesia to proceed to independence without an agreement with Barotseland. Why? Because the British government did not want to have Barotseland as a protectorate anymore. So they had to leave them in the hands of Northern Rhodesia and have them work together to become a country known as Zambia. The British government had been paying the British South Africa Company huge sums in royalties for land and minerals. The incoming Zambian government seized the land from the British South Africa Company and terminated any and every payment arrangement. On October 24, 1964, Northern Rhodesia became the independent Republic of Zambia. And within a year, issues that would undermine the Barotseland Agreement began to appear. The most damning was the Local Government Act of the 15th of October 1965. This act abolished the native authorities. It introduced local government, with local authorities and districts under the full control of the central government through the Minister of Local Government. Why is this significant? Because we just went through the Barotseland Agreement, and in Section 4, it talks about the Litunga and his council, and it specifically says that the Litunga is the local authority of Barotseland. All the funds held in the Barotse Native Treasury were transferred to the newly established Barotse Local Government Fund under the control of the Minister of Local Government. And on the 1st of November 1965, the Barotse National Council was abolished, as most of the functions of that council were transferred to the district councils. The Barotse royal establishment and the traditionalists accused the central government of breaking the 1964 Barotseland Agreement. This is a clip from a 1999 Swedish documentary where the late Ngambela Maxwell Mututwa gives a first-hand account of the impact the changes had on Barotseland.
Manyando abubotana muzio onibulera kuona lya lui oramulene omutuna obulozi no tivani mane ni haba fakama yani ya sipi ye kamulisha milili no kubizwa kuyikwani ko kushire kikona kwa nalolo mulene wasinanga kwani ko kutivani kiona lya lui kashe kwa mubone eshe mandu kaofera kuzwa 1965 abolile awile kakuli akuna nebasesikana sabafumana kuli bayaise mandu manduna balobala mwalikota pula yabanela ikalapala mali apala.
Outside the royal palace in Lealui, the empty safes lie on the ground and remind Ngambela, the Barotse Prime Minister of the time when old Barotseland's finances were sound and her safes well stocked.
Gold, diamonds, more. Kakukanga kozo no kusidama silver, nerifera gold yenesebeza. Mabulozi. Kafe azobam kiye batu tizip. Lunya amuso makaunda.
On November 13, 1968, the Litunga, King Wanawina Lewanika III, BRE, died. On November 15, 1968, Godwin Mbekusita Lewanika was enthroned as the Litunga. The year is now 1969, and on August 26, President Kaunda holds a press conference. The following measures, he says, have been taken. First, Barotse province is now to become Western Province. Second, the Barotse Native School is to assume another name. We cannot have a nation within a nation. I know that this is a legacy of colonialism. Number 3, under custom law, wildlife and fish in certain areas have belonged to individual Indunas and other similar traditional leaders. This amounted to a situation in which some people had natural rights which transcended the rights of all the other people. I do not think this is fair, and we cannot afford a divided nation. In October 1969, the government unilaterally canceled the Barotse Agreement through the Constitution Amendment Act of the 15th of October 1969. And through this act, all the rights, liabilities, and obligations which attached to the Barotse Agreement 1964, were abolished. The Lozi royal establishment and traditionalists had attempted to engage with the president personally to drop the bill. However, on October 15th, the second reading of the bill was overwhelmingly passed by Parliament, in which the ruling United National Independence Party, UNIP, had a majority of 81 seats compared to 23 seats for the opposition ANC, African National Congress. The year is 1991, and Zambia is ready for multi-party democracy. Before the 1991 elections took place, Kaunda responded to a letter the Barotse royal establishment sent him to restore the 1964 Barotseland Agreement. Kaunda offered to pay for the lawyer the Litunga would appoint so that the matter can be resolved professionally by engaging the Attorney General. However, Kaunda lost the elections, and the lawyer appointed RMA Chongwe and Company engaged the new Chiluba administration. Nothing tangible ever came from those talks with that administration. The year is now 2010, and Rupia Banda is the president. On October 23rd, a group, the Barotse Freedom Movement, whose aim is to restore the agreement, demonstrate in Mongu. Michael Sata, at that time, the leader of the main opposition party, Patriotic Front, PF, jumped at the opportunity to make political capital, and early in January 2011, he spent 10 days in Barotseland canvassing.
We shall implement that agreement within 90 days because it will help us run other provinces. We are going to create provincial assemblies because all the money cannot be divided in Lusaka. Lusaka doesn't know what's happening in Barotseland.
6 days later, separatists hold a rally on the 14th of January, which results in the police killing demonstrators with live ammunition. They arrest over 100 people and charge them with treason. These people include Lingambela Maxwell Mututwa, who at this time is 92 years old. Upon his release, he would pass away a few months later. In September 2011, Michael Sata becomes president, and he orders an inquiry into the Mongu riots and grievances of the Lozi people. The Chongwe Commission concluded that the Barotse Agreement should be restored. Michael Sata disagrees and gives this reason.
And all those next authorities, if now today you are saying we should bring back the Barotse establishment, then let us forget about Zambia. Because if you bring back the Barotse establishment, then you bring the Zambia next authority establishment, the Gold next authority establishment, the Chewa next authority establishment, the Braemar, all of them. Because first of all, you haven't told me what benefit did the Barotse establishment or the Barotse Agreement derive or gave to the Barotse people. So when we are making decisions, we understand we can accept to investigate the brutality, investigate the torture, but I'm very reluctant to advise my government to reinstate the Barotse Agreement. Because by so doing, that's bringing Pandora's box. All the provinces, all the president who come say you so much to see they succeed. Even if they succeed, they were granted secession today. What resources have they got to raise enough taxes to maintain, to give themselves what they want to sustain themselves?
In response to this comment, on March 28, 2012, the Barotse National Council informed Zambia and the international community that they finally accept the unilateral nullification and the abrogation of the Barotseland Agreement 1964 by the Zambian government, which action has freed Barotseland from being part of Zambia. And in line with the post-millennium doctrine, they can no longer be obliged to honor an international agreement that the other party has nullified and abrogated, which has reverted them to their original status. The year is now 2013, and 3 political leaders are imprisoned. The charge is that they had taken an oath of office as Barotse Administrative General to implement the secession that had been announced by the council. Likando Peleko died in 2020 at the age of 65, while Mr. Mombotwa and Mr. Kalima remain in prison with their health deteriorating. The year is now 2019, and the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Catherine Namugala, responds to a point of order that was raised where a member of parliament had referred to Western Province as Barotseland. Her response, in summary, pretty much said this: Barotseland was a British protectorate that no longer exists. This response ruffled more than a few feathers for those who understand, know, and appreciate the history of this country.
The issue of Barotseland is back because perhaps the deputy speaker, recklessly issued a statement. Look, you really need to have people that, above board when dealing with issues of Barotseland. And I must mention that this issue of Barotseland is not something that never existed. It is something that existed. So many maps have been done. Rhodesia, for students of law doing legal process, understand that when you're looking at Zambia's legal system, where it is coming from, that particular northwestern Rhodesia is documented. All lawyers know that. And even when it moved, because that northwestern Rhodesia, which primarily became more like Barotseland, had even a court system. That is what every lawyer knows, which were referred to as Barotse native courts. Whereas the northeastern Rhodesia was mostly disorganized. They never had that court system. And the whites respected that, and Malawi. So you can see all these maps. Now, if we are going to ignore this, we are not securing our future properly. And what KK did was very clever. The moment they made these changes, he knocked out all this history from school. That's why you never learned about it. Then they came up with books that could be approved by State House, written Kenneth Kaunda Foundation. So much confusion came. You were indoctrinated and given history that you can't understand. When you go further, you look at the deep history of this country, you will find much of this information. But we are in the modern era where people are accessing internet information.
Absolutely, brother. You just said it. I am so glad for the internet. I remember when the internet first began back in the 90s. So yeah, there's a lot of information that you're able to get. And I'm going to end the documentary here, even though we know that this is not the end of the situation. The one thing that's clear is that Kenneth Kaunda, our beloved father, made a mistake by not treating the Litunga as an equal partner. That is just it. And I can say that because, as we saw in the documentary, in 1991, he sought to make amends, but he was voted out. 100 years of colonization did one thing. We assimilated, we gelled. We went to school together. We went to church together. We married. We work in hospitals together. When you live outside Zambia and you meet a Zambian, that's the only thing that matters, is that you're a Zambian. We also fought for independence together. And when we did that, we emerged as Zambians. As much as we are one Zambia, one nation, we are also one Zambia with many stories. And this is just one of them. This is I Stand with Zambia YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to share this video, leave your comment, and subscribe.